Summer camp is usually a time for adventure and making memories. In 1977, a summer camp in Oklahoma turned into a nightmare. Over 100 Girl Scouts arrived at Camp Scott, expecting 2 weeks of fun and friendship. But on the night of June 12th, tragedy struck. An intruder snuck into a tent and took the lives of 3 young girls. Lori Farmer, 8, Michelle Goose, 9, and Denise Milner, 10. The girls were brutally assaulted and murdered, their bodies found under a tree just 100 yards from their tent. The camp's joyful atmosphere was shattered. Was it the work of a lone killer or multiple attackers? The details are chilling and the questions are many. On June 12, 1977, almost 140 Girl Scouts arrived at Camp Scott, a vast wooded retreat southeast of Locust Grove in northeast Oklahoma. For decades, the Magic Empire Council of Girl Scouts had maintained the camp, and the girls were looking forward to a week full of cherished traditions and fun. Tragically, no one could have predicted the nightmare that awaited 3 of these young campers. On the evening of that day, the night before camp officially began, the girls settled into their tents at Camp Scott. Among them were Lori Lee Farmer, 8, Doris Denise Milner, 10, and Michelle Heather Goose, 9. These 3 girls, all from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, shared tent number 7 in the camp's Kiowa unit. This tent was the farthest from the camp counselor's tent and was partially hidden by the camp showers. The following morning, June 13th, around 6 a.m., a camp counselor discovered a disturbing scene. On her way to the shower, she spotted a girl's body in a sleeping bag in a wooded area just outside the tent area. A frantic search revealed that all 3 girls from tent number 7 were missing. Tragically, their bodies were found on a trail leading to the showers, about 150 yards from their tent. 2 of the bodies were stuffed inside a sleeping bag, crumpled towards the bottom, while the 3rd body was visible on the outside. The girls had been bludgeoned, strangled, and raped. A large red flashlight was discovered on top of the girls' bodies, but the smudged fingerprint on its lens was too unclear for identification. Investigators also found a footprint from a size 9.5 shoe in the blood within the tent. Between 2:30 and 3 a.m. on June 13th, a landowner reported hearing unusual traffic on a remote road near the camp. This detail added to the chilling puzzle. Interestingly, less than 2 months before the murders, a counselor at Camp Scott found her belongings ransacked and her donut stolen during an on-site training session. Inside the empty donut box was a handwritten note stating, "We're on a mission to kill 3 girls in Tent 1. This note was dismissed as a prank and discarded. Days after the murders, local squirrel hunters tipped off officers to a nearby cave. Inside, they found a roll of masking tape with a piece of plastic stuck to it, which matched the tape found on the flashlight at the crime scene. Further investigation revealed that the fractures in the tape and the newspaper inside the cave matched evidence from the crime scene. This breakthrough suggested a significant link to the cave. However, the most critical clue came when a prison employee recognized 2 wedding photographs found in the cave, which were later broadcast on the nightly news. These photos led police to believe they had their suspect, Jean Leroy Hart, a fugitive and convicted rapist. Jean Leroy Hart, born on November 27, 1943, had been a fugitive since escaping from Mays County Jail in 1973. He had been convicted of kidnapping and raping 2 pregnant women and 4 counts of first-degree burglary. Hart, who grew up about a mile from Camp Scott and was a member of the Cherokee Nation, was arrested within a year at the home of a Cherokee medicine man. He was represented by local Oklahoma attorney Garvin A. Isaacs. After a massive 10-month manhunt, one of the largest in Oklahoma history, Hart was captured in a cabin in the Cookson Hills on April 6, 1978. During his trial, his defense attorneys argued that he was framed. They questioned how the black and white wedding photos ended up in the cave, suggesting that Hart had left them behind after his escape and that the evidence had been planted. Despite the evidence against him, after 7 days of testimony, Hart was acquitted of the murders. This verdict was a severe blow to the families of the 3 girls. Sherry Farmer, Lori's mother, clearly remembers the day the verdict was read. "We stopped by the cemetery," she said. "I promised Lori we would keep searching for justice and do something positive in her memory." Sherry and her husband, Bo, have since dedicated their lives to victims' rights and giving parents like them a voice. Sherry expressed her frustration with the judicial system. "In our case, when the verdict was read, the judge said, in case number 777025, not guilty. And honestly, it was at that moment I realized that Lori, to the court, did not even have a name," said Sherry. "When we walked away with a not guilty verdict, that was one of the things that stuck in my mind that I hoped I could change, was the way we view victims. The man sitting there accused had a name, but the 3 girls did not have a name. The local sheriff was certain that Jean Leroy Hart was guilty, but a local jury acquitted him. Despite this, Hart was still a convicted rapist and jail escapee. He had 305 years left to serve in his 308-year sentence. Hart returned to the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, where he died of a heart attack in the exercise yard on June 4, 1979. He was only 35 years old at the time. 2 of the families later sued the Magic Empire Council and its insurer for $5 million, alleging negligence. The civil trial brought up the threatening note and the fact that tent number 7 was 86 yards from the counselor's tent. In 1985, jurors decided in favor of the Magic Empire Council by a 9-3 vote. And as with many cases that are unsolved, new theories and suspects for this case emerged over the years. In one instance, a woman claimed her brother and his 2 friends killed the girls. At first, the police looked into the claims but ruled them out later as there was no solid evidence. Then, in 1989, the FBI tested a semen stain found on a pillowcase inside Michelle's sleeping bag. The results were a partial match to Hart. DNA testing showed that 3 of the 5 probes matched Hart's DNA. If we look at it statistically, DNA from 1 in 7,700 Native Americans would obtain these results. However, it would be another 20 years before more sophisticated DNA testing was done. These tests were inconclusive, but they could eliminate other suspects, though not Hart. This evidence convinced Sheriff Mike Reed of Hart's involvement. "Everything I look at still points to Jean Hart," he said, "and I don't have a single other thing pointing to somebody else." The case remains open. Sherry Farmer continues to fight for justice. She wants to ensure that Lori, Denise, and Michelle are remembered. "I always call this Lori's legacy of love," she said. "She didn't get to live and grow up, but she does have a legacy. And to me, it is love. That's how Bo and I have lived our lives. Our children are all grown up. Our grandchildren are a lot grown up, but they have learned how to live with their sister being murdered and make amazing choices in what they do and how they conduct their lives. Our grandchildren have done amazing things." After the murders, Camp Scott was shut down. In 1988, the Girl Scout Council sold the property, and today it's a hunting ground. "Closure will not be a part of our lives," said Sherry. "Our pathway has always been for justice for Lori and to help other people, and it always will be." In 2017, $30,000 in donations were raised by the sheriff to conduct new DNA tests using the latest advances in testing. In 2022, authorities announced that DNA evidence strongly suggests Hart's involvement. Sheriff Mike Reed of Mays County said, "Unless something new comes up, something brought to light we are not aware of, I am convinced where I'm sitting of Hart's guilt and involvement in this case. Reed said the results of the DNA tests have been known since 2019, but he did not go public with the findings until asked to do so by the victims' families. The tragic incident at Camp Scott remains one of the most heartbreaking and mysterious cases in Oklahoma's history. While Hart was the main suspect, his acquittal left many questions unanswered, and the true identity of the killer remains unknown, and the case remains open. The legacy of Lori, Denise, and Michelle continues to drive the pursuit of justice. Their families, especially Sherry and Beau Farmer, remain committed to ensuring that their daughters are remembered and that their tragic deaths lead to positive changes for other victims. Hart had a history of violence and assault, which aligns with the brutal nature of the crime. He escaped from jail in 1973, and during his time on the run, he stayed in the woods near Camp Scott, where he was familiar with the terrain. We think that this knowledge of the area would have given him an advantage in planning and executing the attack without being detected. On the night of the murders, it's likely Hart was lurking around the camp, waiting for the right moment. The threatening note found weeks before the murders indicated premeditation. Hart, driven by his criminal tendencies, targeted the girls in tent number 7, which was located 86 yards from the counselor's tent, providing a secluded spot for the attack. The girls, Lori, Denise, and Michelle, were likely asleep when he attacked, reducing the chances of them crying out and alerting others. He then moved quickly, knowing he had limited time before someone might hear or discover the scene. The semen stain found on Michelle's pillowcase, partially matching Hart's DNA, strengthens this scenario. Although the DNA evidence was not conclusive, it was consistent enough to not rule him out. So, given the statistical match, it strongly suggests a high probability that Hart was involved. Speaking of which, the inconclusive results from later testing do not eliminate Hart, but instead fail to pinpoint another suspect, keeping him as the prime suspect. While we may never hear the absolute truth from him, the most plausible scenario is that Jean Leroy Hart was responsible for the tragic deaths of Lori, Denise, and Michelle. He was the one who murdered them at Camp Scott. Do you agree with our perspective on what likely happened, or do you have a completely different theory? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love our content and want to support our channel, do check out our web shop, where you can find exclusive true crime merch brought to you by Bad Things.